excited to have this conversation together. We're just going to let everybody roll in out of the weight room and we'll get started in like 30 seconds. Excellent. Well, hello, good morning, and welcome to part one of our two-part series, Transforming Food Systems Through Advocacy, Community Leadership in Policy Change. My name is Heather Breskin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Montgomery County Food Council. I encourage everybody who's on the call this morning to please introduce yourself in the Zoom chat with your name, preferred pronouns, and organization, if applicable. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the mic over to the County Executive for opening remarks. But first, I want to set just a few ground rules for event attendees. Please make sure that you're muted throughout the session to minimize background noise. We suggest selecting speaker mode during this event so that you can clearly see each speaker, and you can toggle between speaker mode and gallery mode by clicking in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom screen as you hover your mouse over that area. And we welcome audience questions during the moderated discussion, but please use the chat box as the place to share your questions and comments. And the Food Council staff will be monitoring the chat box and sharing additional questions with our moderator today. I also want to make sure that I give thanks to our generous sponsor for this series, the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Co-op, who've been a leader in food systems issues in so many ways, from creating economic and market opportunities for MoCo-made businesses to increasing SNAP and retail access for all residents to nutritious, locally produced foods and beverages. You'll hear more from the co-op during part two of our series, which is next Thursday, October 28th at noon. And I also want to thank Holy Cross Health for their partnership in making this event possible. And so now, to get us started in our time together today, I'm honored to welcome County Executive Mark Elrich, who's been a champion and dedicated partner of building resilience and sustainability in our local food system. We're thrilled to have him join us to kick off this series with welcoming remarks. Thank you so much, Mr. Elrich, for joining us this morning. Oh, and you're gonna get you unmuted.
Unmuted there. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
I just said, thank you for inviting me to join you this morning. And I think, as some of you know, I was one of the founding members of the co-op way back when it was a small store on Sligo Avenue in Silver Spring, and we gutted it, renovated it, and turned it into a grocery store. So that goes back a ways. I know the Food Council is an important plays an important role in bringing everybody together around different food issues in the county. And you've been doing this for a while now. The pandemic certainly, I think, changed the frame on things. I remember, looking at news broadcasts where they'd do these overhead photos of food lines in Montgomery County. And it would, the headline would be, food lines in Montgomery County, ? Like who knew? And I think you knew, and I think we all knew, that food was a serious issue for many families in Montgomery County and has been so for a while. And the effect of the pandemic was to basically put more of a spotlight on a problem that was there before the pandemic and is going to be there when we come out of the pandemic. So, it's good to see this finally elevated to the point where I think where people are addressing it more fully. All our efforts during the pandemic had an underlying equity lens, which has made an enormous difference, for example, in closing the vaccination gaps among our different populations. Our Black and white populations are now within 2 points of each other in vaccination rate, and the most vaccinated people in this county are the Hispanic and Asian communities. And all that happened because of the work that was done to reach deeper into the communities. A lot of credit goes to Salud a Bienestar, which was brought to us by Nancy and Gabe on the council, and also the African American Health Program, which was given, a far greater role. We shifted from a strictly center-led, government-led program to a program where we trusted the community and gave them more leeway to develop programs and tell us what they needed resources to do, rather than us assuming that we had the right answer to every question. And I think that's a lesson going forward in terms of how we plan on operating in the future. That's why the hubs are in the budget for this year, and they're going to be in the budget for next year. We're going to continue this model going forward. It's really important to the folks in the county. We've worked hard with our food partners to address food insecurity. As you know, we created a food task force in April 2020, and we've worked with all of you, and over 100 food assistant providers have played a role investing and in bulk food purchasing and working with us to make sure we get food out. We've provided $20 million to our food banks and food access providers. And I think that one of the most amazing statistics is the fact that we provided over 20 million meals in Montgomery County, from our partners to the school system to the county. 20 million meals have gone out, and that's an old number. That number continues to increase. So this is, I think, a remarkable achievement for a remarkable community that came together and said, we need to make sure that people get fed. And again, realize this wasn't going to be done by government alone. You know, we may be better. I think we're probably better with dollars than we are with programs sometimes. And you're often able to implement things faster than we are, but you often need our support in order to be able to do that. And I think that's kind of the healthy symbiotic relationship that emerged from this. So this success of this mission is, you know, largely due to our partnership with you. And I just want to thank all the professionals and volunteers who've been on the front lines from day one. You put yourselves in peril before vaccines were available to make sure the people who had just lost their jobs and support systems did not go hungry. And of course, the impeccable coordination and advocacy that came from the leadership of the Food Council to support this mission. And I'm sure Craig and I have both been on the food distribution lines, and particularly in the beginning, when it was painfully clear that people did not have the quality of, you know, protective equipment. And we sent our employees out, we sent, you know, volunteers out to do this work, and people willingly did this work, knowing that they were putting themselves at risk. So you deserve a lot of credit, you know, and for your courage and willingness to do this work under really difficult circumstances. It's clear that the pandemic deepened inequities, and by increasing poverty, and also highlighted health disparities. I remember having a conversation with folks in a group of hospitals who talked about this kind of realization that they were getting a lot of minority COVID patients who had pre-existing conditions. And that kind of tells you probably how little some of the healthcare system was accessed by our residents who, you know, don't have access to high quality healthcare. And the fact that the hospitals were surprised by the comorbidities that were being presented. I think that's something that we've talked about for a while, the persistent comorbidities that exist in the community. We know how important the farmers and the ag reserve and food production is in the county. I'm one of those who hopes that over time the ag reserve pivots more to local crop production for local food and away from commodity markets. But all that depends, you know, frankly, on our ability to link the ag reserve to consumers, and to both individual consumers and business consumers, so that they know that if they put a crop in the ground, the crop's going to be taken out. And so we have work to do there, but we know that a lot of farmers are interested in this. We're seeing more high tunnels and deer fences and cold storage and, you know, things going into the ag reserve that weren't there before that should help us increase production. I'm a big believer in, you know, allowing them to use hoop farms and hoop houses to grow crops beyond just the spring and summer, but to extend crop growing longer into the year. And I expect we're going to see more of that. And our farm to food bank program is producing food for people in need. In the fall, we gave capacity building grants up to $20,000 to 22 farmers to install all that equipment I talked about. We have 28 farmers in 2021 who are participating in the Farm to Food Bank to increase wholesale production for food in need. We plan to continue these programs in 2022 to help address food resiliency, but more importantly, it's part of our effort to work with our local farmers to expand food production. And we're continuing to work with the Food Council as part of our climate action work. And I know Heather knows, you know, the project we're working on in White Oak, in the old CHI Center, in cooperation with CHI to, you know, bring the potential of food processing there. It's not big enough to serve the whole county, and my vision is that we do multiples of these kind of centers around the county. It's an opportunity to spread jobs everywhere. and to, combine with some of our other partners to bring a wider range of jobs to the community level. And I'm really encouraged by the progress we're making. And I look forward to being able to work with you and Delegate Charkoudian to complete this project. It's very exciting. Any discussion about climate change has to include the environment, and it has to include food. Those two things are inseparable. How we grow things has major impacts for climate change, and climate change is going to have major impacts on what we grow. So we're going to see changes in seasons and changes in rain, but the agricultural practices themselves can either contribute to climate change or they can help us avert climate change. So the role of agriculture is going to be large, and our climate action plan was finalized. And I want to thank the Food Council for submitting substantive comments on the draft plan, which I think in the end strengthened the report, and looking forward to working on that. I think it's important that everybody realize that unlike a lot of other things we do, you issue a report and you march down a path, the landscape is so changing in terms of technology, access to funds, and what we understand about climate, that this is really a living document. And we expect the climate change plan to be revised annually based on what we know as time goes on. So we're not going to be always referring back to the 2021 climate plan as the guidepost for the county. It is the pathway, but the guides are going to change as we move down that path, and as technology and frankly access to resources begins to change for us. Part of the analysis we're doing is the potential to lever procurement power of anchor institutions to drive climate actions. And there will be an emphasis on sustainable building, local food, and agriculture supply chain. I just returned quickly to this notion of hoop houses and greenhouses. In Cleveland, the Commonwealth Project did a couple of things that was really dependent on supply chain. They have greenhouses that are operated largely by former people who had been imprisoned, and they are operating greenhouses. They produce about 1 million heads of lettuce, which are sold to restaurants and markets in the Cleveland area. And they actually created a laundry, an ecologically sound laundry, which launders all the stuff that goes into the Cleveland Clinic. So these are examples of what linkages to institutions can do in terms of building and driving new businesses and new opportunities for people. And I'm optimistic we'll be able to do that in this county. We are looking at emphasis on building sustainable and local agriculture supply chain. I'm very excited about that. And the staff is actively engaged with the Food Council to provide input on this analysis. We're in the early stages of launching an agrovoltaic demonstration project. We hope that this project is going to be at the Poolsville Golf Course. It's going to have 1.2 acre solar installation. We're focusing on what table crops we can grow underneath that, and we're hoping that if we can demonstrate that we can successfully do agriculture under photovoltaics, that'll open up more possibilities for agriculture and photovoltaics existing at the same time. So allow us to preserve the ag reserve for the function that we preserved it originally, which was to be, this green food area for the county. And at the same time, to deal with climate change, find a way to combine that along with the food so that we can actually move forward on both fronts simultaneously. And I'm excited. I think, we're going to discover that, taking into account local climate and conditions, we should find a way to do this. And so I think I'm looking forward to results of that. So I think, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on around here with food issues. And I know that, one of your great interests is making this permanent. How do we go from, a food network that was stood up in response to a crisis to a food network that has the capacity to deal with the food problem on an ongoing basis? We don't want to go back to the kind of shortages and the limits we had previously, but we want to make sure we can actually make a sustained, permanent effort to deal with food insecurity. And I'd like to think, I think we're about to unleash a model for that with what we're doing with homelessness. By January, we opened a 200-bed shelter in Rockville. That 200-bed shelter has food for 3 meals a day, has counselors on site, has places for people to stay so they're not kicked out and put on the street during the day, and will give us a much better tool for dealing with homelessness. We need to take that same commitment to a permanent solution to what we do with food insecurity, not dealing with food insecurity in a crisis, but dealing with food insecurity all the time and making that a priority and developing programs and plans that can help us build that more resilient network that I know all of us want to have. So I'll leave you with that. I look forward to partnering with you. I'm very excited about what you've done, and I'm very excited about what we're going to do in the future. So thank you very much. And I will probably hop off because I have to drive to Rockville, but I may listen in while I'm driving. But there's no point in showing my video when I'm driving because you just see the roof of the car. Not very good. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. County Executive. I just deeply appreciate your partnership and your leadership. And we have so many of our partners on this call today who really truly reflect that talented, dedicated network of food system partners. And you've captured really beautifully so many exciting things that are happening in this county due to partnership between community and government in moving this work forward and achieving our vision together. So thank you again for your work and leadership in making all that momentum possible. And so good luck with your drive to Rockville, and thank you again.
I'll just remind you, the council has to fund all this. So
well,
I do not have the power to do any of this by fiat. Everybody has to, come along and agree. These are the paths we all want to go down together. But the council's been great on food issues. They're totally supportive of, there's nobody who doesn't want to feed people, frankly, just like there's nobody who doesn't want to house homeless people, and we can get together on these issues and make, I think, real progress.
Completely agreed. We all have roles to play, and it's a partnership and collaboration within government as well as government and community. And I'm so glad that we'll have the chance a little bit later in our program to highlight Councilmember Craig Rice and the County Council's role in this work too. So thank you again for joining us today and kicking us off for a conversation that continues around the role of advocacy and policy change in transforming our food system. And so to share a little bit more about the role of nonprofits and community partners in moving this work forward, we're going to hear from Michael J. Wilson, the Director of Maryland Hunger Solutions, also the board chair for the Montgomery County Food Council, also an incredible champion of food access, benefits expansion, and supporting our communities in access to nutritious food. And so we're really grateful to have him and his expertise here and as such a dedicated partner in this work. So Michael J., thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm so glad to see so many friendly faces here, so many people who are friends and colleagues. And I'm gonna, break one of the rules, which is you never call people out. But, I've got fellow board members here and council members here and elected officials, but I'm going to especially focus on, Vanessa Pierre, Rona Reese, Michelle Rogers, the folks who are the voice and teach us all about doing advocacy all the time. So while I'm proud to do this presentation, I know each and every one of them could have done a better job. But here's what they wouldn't have done. They wouldn't have told you this joke. What's the difference between the black eyed peas and chickpeas? And if you know the answer, don't shout it out. Black eyed peas will sing you a song, but all chickpeas can do is hum us a tune. See, here's the thing about telling a joke like that. Once you tell a joke like that, everything becomes easier. Nothing's worse after that, right? So laugh along with me and let's talk about the important work about advocacy that needs to get done. And so, you just heard from the county executive, right? The county executive is talking about all the work that's going on, and that's great. We also know that this is coming up on an election year. And so we want to make sure that we have our voices raised, that we have our arguments fine-tuned, and that we have our advocacy ask ready for all of the people who are going to be running for office, but also so that we can share with our neighbors, with our partners, with our communities. We don't want to just advocate for change. We want to educate partners and the public and the press about the changes that we want to see, because change is necessary. You know, those of us who work in this food space know that there are too many people in our communities who are food insecure, and we need to figure out ways to address those things. And I'm going to give you a few pointers to think about as you do your advocacy. And Rona will tell me if I get it right. So, as nonprofit organizations and representatives of nonprofit organizations, we are encouraged to do the things that are least impactful, right? The things that have the least impact are the things we're encouraged to do by law, because we're covered under a section of the law, the IRS code known as 501c3. And the things that have the most impact are the things we are prohibited from doing. So Heather can't go out and say, I want you to vote for X person, because that would be a violation of the law. She can say, these are the issues that we worked on. These are the things that have made a difference. And here are the candidates. And here's how you can talk to those candidates. One has a bigger impact, the direct election or defeat of candidates, and one has less impact. And so the things that we have the least impact to do, we should do. And it begins with, if you can, register to vote. If you can register to vote, register to vote. That's the most important thing you can do, the most important first step in order to be impactful in the election, because your vote is your voice. And don't let anybody tell you how to vote. Use your own intellect. Years ago, when I worked in the labor movement, there were 3 rules that we always had. And this is true both for nonprofits and for each of you. And you can remember these, I guarantee. The 3 things we never do is we never lie, we never beg, and we never threaten. So never say something like, you know, we passed out thousands of pounds of food if you didn't pass out thousands of pounds of food. Never beg, because we are advocates to elected officials who are citizens like ourselves, who are temporarily in office, however long they're in office. And we want to be able to say, you know, Councilmember Rice, I think you really should consider doing this policy. It's not a beg, it's an ask. And you never threaten. Never say, if you don't do this, we're going to defeat you. Or we never, ever threaten. Never lie, never beg, and never threaten. Here are 2 more things we always want to consider doing. Please and thank you. Not just because it's polite, but yes, because it's polite, because you can use please as we would do amongst ourselves, right? But saying thank you is something we rarely do in advocacy. You know, when people have made policy changes, when people have voted on your issue, like Delegate Palkovich-Carr has done, saying thank you is a thing that we should also do. And I want to be really, you know, thoughtful about how we do that. Secondly, you can ask candidates to do things. You can ask elected officials to do things. And even if it's not directly in their wheelhouse, you know, you can still ask. So there will probably be an initiative in the legislature next year to implement healthy school meals for all. Right now, any student attending a Montgomery County school, Marla Kaplan, gets a meal for free. They get breakfast and they get lunch, and they're not being asked to pay for that. That's the current policy of the federal government. But in California, they've also implemented this at the state level. And there are going to be conversations about that in Maryland this year. And so people may be asking Delegate Palkovich-Carr, can you support healthy school meals for all? Because she may have an opportunity to vote for that. And Mayor Ashman won't have that same ability, but he's mayor of a big city in Maryland, and he cares about what happens in those schools. And you can ask the mayor, how can you help support healthy school meals for all? And Craig Rice is on a county council in Montgomery County, but Montgomery County can't deal with this all on their own. they need federal support, they need state support, and the county can say to the state legislature and to the state, how can you help us implement healthy school meals for all? So it's not just on us to ask, but we can also ask elected officials to use their brains, their political skills, their capacity to make changes for us. And that's the thing I want to say. I mean, here's the thing about school meals, and everybody here who's in a public school in Montgomery County, raise your hand. Or if you have kids in a public school, you know, or listen, my kids went to Highland View Elementary School, Silver Spring International Middle School, and graduated from Northwood High School, and they are gone. But what happens in Montgomery County schools still means a lot to the county, to the state, and to the extent we can feed the brains and bodies of our future, we should invest in that. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't invest in WIC and in SNAP and in, you know, the pantries and the food banks. All of those things are part of a food system which is rich and complicated, and during the pandemic got broken. And so the last thing I will say before I end, and I'm not going to tell you another joke, is we know the pandemic changed the entire food system. And there are things that we have learned because of these changes. And the question is, which of these lessons can we adopt going forward? How do we continue to move this forward? How do we continue to have healthy school meals? How do we continue to have, you know, a greater allotment for SNAP benefits? How do we continue to make sure that we have online SNAP usage? How do we promote the restaurant meals program so that people who are SNAP eligible can use them at eligible restaurants? There are so many things that we want to learn from to be able to move forward, but we could only do that if we have our elected officials and policymakers working with us. And they will only do it if you ask. And so I ask that you ask so we can all move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Michael J. I hope you see the visual applause here, even if you can't hear it. But thank you, as always, for your incredible insight onto something that's so important in moving forward on our goals as an organization and as a community. So I look forward to our continued work together on these priorities at all levels of government. And yes, Michael J.
So the one thing I forgot to mention that I want to say is I'm not a lawyer. And so if you need legal advice, seek it, but you can also Google the Alliance for Justice. The Alliance for Justice is the national organization that advises nonprofits about how to interact in campaigns and elections. And I don't want anybody to get in trouble. So ask if you've got a question, but I do want you to know you should be encouraged to participate. You should definitely participate, and you should use your voice and your vote in every way that is possible.
Thank you again. We'll be sure to share that link and that organization name in the chat box too. And now we turn to Evelyn Kelly, who is both on the board of directors for the Montgomery County Food Council and leading our strategic planning work and contributing to our work in so many different ways, but also a program director with the Institute for Public Health Innovation. And Evelyn, so glad to have you here, shepherding the second half of our time together this morning and welcoming many special guests for a panel of elected officials. So thank you, Evelyn, for your leadership on this morning's program.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Heather. So at this time, I would like to transition us to our panel discussion. We have the unique opportunity this morning to hear directly from policymakers at the municipal, county, and state levels on how their work and priorities are informed by community voice and expertise. So our discussion will touch upon examples of how advocacy has led to food systems and policy changes, as well as insights on effective advocacy strategies. And overall, we want to leave our participants with strategies, effective strategies to engage elected officials on food policy issues. So joining us today, we have Delegate Julie Palkovich-Carr from the Maryland House District 17. We also have Councilmember Craig Rice from the Montgomery County Council representing District 2, and Mayor Judd Ashman from the city of Gaithersburg. So at this time, I'd like to encourage our participants to please drop in your questions in the chat so we can incorporate them in our dialogue. We do want to make this as interactive as possible. And with that, I'd like to open up our discussion by asking each of our panelists to take a few minutes to highlight what they are currently doing to partner with advocates and organizations to create food system policy change. And I will kick it to Delegate Palkovich-Carr to kick us off.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to get to have a chance to talk about how to be an effective advocate. I'll say, as I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today, this is actually something that's kind of near and dear to my heart because one of the other hats I wear, in addition to being a lawmaker, is actually training scientists about how to be effective advocates for their science with policymakers, with the public, with the media. And actually, there's a lot of crossover amongst these two communities, if you can believe it, in terms of what effective advocacy can look like. So actually, I just want to start off by highlighting an opportunity at the state level that your organizations may be interested in and may be of value to you, which is a funding source from the state, which is known as legislative bond initiatives. These used to be called bond bills, but it's basically a matching grant program that is available for organizations that are based in Maryland, usually nonprofits, but it's a little broader than that, to be used for capital projects. So a couple of years ago, Manna Food Center, which is located in Gaithersburg in the district that I represent, came to myself and some of the other representatives for District 17 to highlight that they had a need for some additional funding to expand their cold storage for their facilities so they could distribute more healthy foods, more fresh produce. And we helped them through that legislative bond initiative process. I was the sponsor for the House bill, but all four of us who represent District 17 were part of the team in terms of pushing this forward. And it is a great funding opportunity. It can't be, this particular funding source can't be used for operations, but it can be used for capital projects, whether building a new facility, maintenance, renovations, et cetera. It's pretty wide in terms of how it can be applied and used on the ground. And ultimately, we were able to help Manna get $150,000 that year towards that project. So this is actually a great opportunity. Every year, there are tens of millions of dollars that are awarded at the state level by the General Assembly for these kinds of projects. And I just want to put that on everyone's radar.
All right, thank you, Delegate. Councilmember Rice.
So good morning to everybody. And I want to pick up where Michael left off, because I think it's incredibly important for folks to understand about establishing relationships with elected officials. Delegate Carr knows this all too well. Mayor Ashman knows this all too well. The county executive knows this all too well. But the importance of, before you even make an ask, having that relationship there and having people understand about what you're doing and why it's so important means so much. And so I'll give you an example, and I'll highlight the great organization Manna that Delegate Carr just talked about, because I've been to Manna multiple times, over and over again, throughout the years, done videos and recorded them for Manna, advocating for people to contribute, to make sure that we're helping to support the organization to grow. And so when it came to the pandemic, it was March 31st of 2020, in which the council passed its first special appropriation in response to COVID relief. That was a $260,000 appropriation to Manna to help expand its food services, understanding that we were going to see food insecurity as a result of the pandemic. Now, I want to remind you, that's 2 weeks in to the pandemic. We knew and identified right away that food insecurity was going to be a primary driver in our communities, and we needed to answer the call as local government. I will tell you that one of the second things we did, also spearheaded by my office, was reach out to our school system and make sure that our school system had the stability to be able to provide meals. We knew, and myself as chair of the Education and Culture Committee for the County Council, was very concerned that if we're shutting down schools, where were kids going to get their meals? Because we knew, as we heard from Michael Wilson earlier, that many of our children, that's their only meal of the day. So it needs to be healthy, but it also needs to be available. And it wasn't. because our school doors were shut down. And so we immediately pivoted to working a relationship with Senator Chris Van Hollen in advocating. He's on the Appropriations Committee, and had him, based on his role and his respected position, to be able to pressure the U.S. Department of Agriculture to make sure that we were granting waivers to school systems, not just here in Montgomery County, but across the nation. That was a very big deal. And now we fast forward to where we are now, to where you heard from Michael that we now have free meals across the board. Folks don't have to fill out forms. And we're advocating at the national level that that should be a standard. So there's advocacy happening all around. But I will tell you this, that it starts grassroots. It starts with individuals. It starts with folks identifying what it is that they're doing and just making sure that elected officials are aware, so that when the time comes where you know that there's going to be a need, we already know the work that you're doing. We already trust and have established a relationship with you. And it's easy to then say, we're going to move forward in helping to support you to help support our community and our constituents. And so I'll close with that.
Thank you, Council Member. Mayor Ashman?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that the order was absolutely appropriate given the legislative scope of food policy. The city of Gaithersburg plays a different sort of role, and it's an unusual role. I'm going to just give you a little bit of background on that. But before I do, I just want to commend Michael J. on his advice. Never lie, never beg, never threaten. That's like, if you come out of this with nothing else, that's like advocacy 101. It's just brilliant. I really appreciate how he boiled that down. So in the city of Gaithersburg and municipalities, we have a relationship with the county. The county is the primary arm for social service policy and action in the county. And most municipalities don't take a direct role at all. The city of Gaithersburg is unusual in that we voluntarily invest money into these causes that the county would otherwise be solely responsible for. And the investment is substantial, usually around $1 million of our $65 to $70 million total budget. And coming out of lockdown, we actually bumped that up 50%, around 50% this year's budget. So this commitment to enhance services to those in need in our community is something the council and I are really proud of. For the most part, we don't run these services in-house. We partner with a coalition of nonprofit providers. So if you here today are a nonprofit provider, there are opportunities for you to get involved with us as well. And we address things in addition to food and nutrition needs, housing, health, mental health, financial, vocational assistance to individuals and families. And our nonprofit partners are fantastic. And our contributions come in the form of grant programs, community collaborations, a lot of outreach and creative partnerships. In terms of our process, we utilize citizen volunteers really first, who served Gaithersburg on our Environmental Affairs Committee, our Community Advisory Committee, our Educational Enrichment Committee, and they help, these volunteers in these various areas help us identify need in the community and provide recommendations to the mayor and council for funding grant allocations. As they determine need, or the way they determine need, I should say, is through formal and informal surveys, through listening sessions, outreach events. We definitely get input from testimony and from emails that come into the mayor and council and to the city. And we solicit input and feedback directly from our residents and from our partners who provide services. And so that's kind of an overview of how it works at the city. The one way that we found in recent years, other than lockdown year last year, to keep people, to help us as elected officials better understand how nonprofits are serving our communities, we have a community services showcase night. And we've done it in different places where we bring out all of our nonprofit partners, and they have booths and displays, and we just go around from display to display, and they explain what they're doing, how they're serving our community. And I think it's really, really helpful to the mayor and council in our understanding. As Craig Rice said, we already know when they come to us and it's locked, there's a pandemic or some sort of problem, we already have a sense of it. It really helps, and everybody's invited members of the community come out to it too. We've certainly had Delegate Polakovich Carr with us. So that's just one idea I'll throw out there, and I'll leave it there for now.
Right, thank you. A lot of very helpful information. I want to move us to talk a bit about effective advocacy strategies. So many times during the trainings I conduct with grassroots leaders to talk about advocacy, the whole process can seem sometimes elusive or sometimes impossible. It's like, will they really listen to me? Like, how can I get their attention? There's so many competing priorities. So I really am interested in learning and hearing examples of advocacy that has led to particularly food system and policy changes. And specifically, if you could walk us through what were those effective advocacy strategies that were utilized and how were they initiated by grassroots leaders or nonprofits? And I'll open up this question to all of the panelists.
So if I could jump in, because I have really what I think is a great example because it ties into what we're doing with food security. And it happened with middle school students. I had 3 young ladies who made an appointment because they wanted to talk to me about composting. And of course, you know, one of the funniest things is, and I know Delegate Carr as well as Mayor Ashman know about this all too well, but people assume that they can't get appointments with us, that somehow because we're elected leaders, it means that there's some wall that's set up and we won't meet with people, which couldn't be farther from the truth. So I had these 3 young ladies who came into my office, middle school students, who wanted to talk to me about composting. And they had a presentation laid out. It was very specific. They kept on target. My legislative aide had said, you know, you've got 30 minutes. Council members very incredibly busy, and this is pre-COVID. So said, you know, the council members very busy schedule, lots of appointments back to back. They were organized. They had all of their information. They had their data, and they gave a very convincing presentation about why I should be their advocate on behalf of making sure that MCPS develops a robust composting program. I will fast forward to today, where that composting program is in multiple schools, not only in middle schools, but in high schools throughout Montgomery County. They were very convincing. And not only to myself, but I made sure that I set up a meeting with Dr. Smith so that they could talk directly to the superintendent. They talked to multiple colleagues all throughout. And again, told their story, talked about why it was important to them, and more importantly, why it was important to the greater community and our world as a whole. Making sure that we address the issues of climate change, making sure that we have students that understand our food to waste stream and what goes on. All of those things were incredibly important. They enacted change. Those 3 young ladies that were middle school students enacted change in a large system, one of the largest school systems in the nation, the largest in the state. And that says something. That says something about how government, how our structures and our departments are open to change with advocacy, making sure that you're focused, that you have your data and information means everything. But it starts with making the appointment, talking to folks, opening the door. Not every success story is going to be the same, but at the end of the day, the reality is that you continue to move the needle forward when you take that first step. And that's reaching out and ensuring that you believe that your government, that your departments, your agencies are going to be working hand in hand with you. That's where it starts.
Thank you, Council Member. Any other remarks from our delegate or mayor?
Julie, you go first.
Okay. Thank you, Jed. Yeah, I think one of the keys to successful advocacy is understanding who your audience is. And that's true at the macro level in terms of like what the position is that they hold and what their authority or power to act might be, as well as for them as an individual. So at that macro level, I'll say at the state level, particular to the General Assembly, there are 188 of us, 47 senators, 141 delegates. So, you know, me as an individual, I'm a very small slice of that big pie of how many people collectively represent the state of Maryland. And I think it's important for people to recognize that, to also recognize that the legislature is not a full-time job or entity. We only meet for 90 days out of the year, starting in about mid-January till about mid-April. So we have a very compact, condensed time period to actually act on issues. So a lot of work and advocacy at the state level, timing is very important. There are very strict deadlines in terms of when bills have to be introduced by as part of the legislative process. Now, at the individual level, knowing who your audience is, it's important, whether you're talking to a state legislator or one of your representatives at the county or municipal level or the federal level, is to understand that person's interests. Because when you go in to talk to someone, you care about an issue, you might have a particular viewpoint about why you think that this particular issue is important, but that might not be an issue that resonates with the elected official that you're speaking with. You need to figure out what they're going to be concerned about. And I'd say, even within topics related to food, there are different angles that you can come at one given issue from. It could be from about helping people and food security and hunger. And that might resonate with a lot of people, but perhaps for other lawmakers, they're going to be more concerned about supporting small businesses or supporting farmers. So, think about how you can reframe your message so that it'll resonate better with your particular audience. I guess lastly, I'll just echo Councilmember Rice about the importance of doing meetings. I think that is true at most levels of government, that lawmakers are very willing to take meetings, whether that's in person or more nowadays Zoom. But those meetings really are the most effective way to reach out to elected officials and to get information to them. On any given day, my office probably gets over 100 emails a day on a whole lot of different things. And it sometimes can be hard to cut through the noise of all of that during session. That email volume significantly increases. But having that personal meeting, especially if it's requested by a constituent or a stakeholder in my district, same for my colleagues, is more likely to actually happen. Not to say that we don't take meetings with people who aren't constituents in our district, but I think that tends to become a scheduling priority then.
All right, thank you. Delegate Mayor?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly just further echo Councilmember Rice and his initial advice about sort of laying the groundwork and cultivating relationship with elected officials. But I'll add to that and say also their staff. And in our case, it's particularly important because we're not at the municipal level, we're not full-time. We have full-time staff, including, and I need to shout out here, Maureen Herndon, the head of our community services office, who does incredible work. She makes us all look good. She is somebody who you all need to know for sure. And so when you've laid that foundation, then there's really sort of three things: show us the problem, show us your solution, and in your messaging to us, sort of as you're crafting your messaging, I would say it's important to understand the landscape of competing priorities. Obviously, there's a finite amount of money. There are different things going on. There are different needs in the community. And if you craft your message so that you're sensitive to that, I think you could be, I've seen those messages be more effective.
All right, thank you. As a follow-up to that question, I'm curious to know how COVID has impacted the way residents or community partners can engage with you all. Particularly like today, we're meeting virtually, whereas perhaps 2 years ago, we would have been meeting in person. So just curious to see if there have been any impacts on the way that residents and community partners are connecting with you. And if so, what are ways to limit those potential barriers?
Happy to start just briefly. I've been kind of surprised that since the pandemic started, I've actually had less requests for meetings from stakeholders and constituents. But in my mind, it should be the opposite, because I used Zoom before the pandemic in my day job, but I feel like I'm even more accessible now than I was in the past with not having to drive to a meeting, say, during the day. So I would echo, comments from earlier that have been said about don't be afraid to reach out and to ask for the meeting. I think Zoom is here to stay. It's certainly in my office, it's here to stay for a long time in terms of how I plan to connect with people.
Thank you, Delegate. Any other comments from our panelists?
I've had largely the same phenomenon. I am surprised that I haven't got like an incredible deluge of meeting requests to help address need in the community, but there have been a fair amount, and I'm sure our staff have received their share as well. Since that, most of us got vaccinated, the vast majority of us got vaccinated. I have been taking face-to-face meetings, but it's a judgment call on that. I'll turn it over to Craig.
No, let me just say very, very quickly that look, it's changed tremendously, and we see it from public hearing testimony at the county council every single time that we have it, whether it's daytime or whether it's our evening town halls. The cohort has changed. We see a much more wide array of constituents. They're diverse because we knew that a lot of people couldn't get to the council building. So just like you heard from Delegate Carr, we will be instituting this as a permanent part of what it is that we do to allow for people who are working multiple jobs, who don't have access to childcare in the evening, who really want to attend a meeting to be able to do so. And what it does, having Zoom, I'm actually on 2 Zooms at once as we speak right now. So I'm here with you presenting, but I'm also participating in a Caring Matters board retreat that's happening at the same time. Those things happen. And that could never, ever happen in the space of having in-person meetings. And so we've become more effective. It's funny that people criticize us for saying, oh, you're at home in your home office. Well, yeah, I'm at home on 2 Zoom meetings at once. And those meetings that we have become more frequent. So now I don't have to drive between meetings in person, which takes 45 minutes, an hour, to get to. So now I can do more of them, which means I have more opportunities to meet with constituents and address issues. So COVID has actually given us a better way to be more efficient with our time and to actually meet a lot more of the needs that we're seeing in our community.
Right. Great insights for those who are wondering about that aspect. I want to pivot now to talk about funding. County executive mentioned that. We've seen some resources that were dropped in the chat as well, specifically the legislative bond bills. But we know that in order to create food system changes, it's important not only to develop policies, but to implement them. And that comes with its challenges. And so I'm curious to know, how can elected officials work with community advocates to leverage resources to continue moving the needle forward, particularly as we're in a space, I believe, that a lot of plans and recommendations are putting forward. So how do we keep that momentum going, knowing that funding and resources can be a challenge?
I'm leaving this to the county and state cohorts, because you guys are the ones making the real policy here.
So I'll just jump in. Look, part of what happens, especially when it comes to something like food insecurity, is easy. And the reason why it's easy is because everyone knows and acknowledges that it's not an issue. When I introduced the first special appropriation, like I said, in March 31st, it was unanimous. It had all of my colleagues' support. Then when Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Albornoz, and I did another one in May of that same year for $750,000 to really focus on our BIPOC communities. That one also was unanimous. I mean, so some of this stuff is easy in terms of that it's a no-brainer. This stuff needs to happen. We need to move it forward. I think what does make it a little bit more challenging is when it's some of the other issues that we know are incredibly important, like composting, like food rescue, right? And getting that and then trying to redistribute that. Those are more difficult conversations because not a lot of people know about it, which is why, again, when I talk about advocacy, if folks know what it is from the beginning and you don't have to now educate folks about it, then it's a lot easier for folks to support. And so I will just say that's one of the biggest things that you've heard from all three of us about that relationship, establishing the information up front. The less you have to tell me about what it is that you're doing in your story, and the more that I already know, it's a lot easier for me to then say, yeah, that's a no-brainer. We'll make that happen and go ahead and put it in as a supplemental appropriation or recommend to our grants committee that that's something that they look at. That's incredibly important. And so Thank you, Michael, for laying that out. We get stuck in these acronyms every day. So Michael put in the chat what BIPOC is. It's Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And so it really is important that we establish those relationships. That is key to funding. Because if I know who you are, know the work that you're doing, it's easy for me to then dedicate funding to help support you.
Delegate?
I'll say at the state level, I feel like the legislature does a lot of things right, but there are some things that I've learned in my short, not quite 3 years in the legislature about the culture there that drives me a little crazy, that I think is relevant for this conversation. So sometimes in Annapolis, and more than sometimes, things can have broad support, yet still don't go anywhere. And it might take years for things to pass. So I think it's important to realize in terms of advocacy at the state level that although bills do pass their first year and get enacted their first year, that usually isn't the norm on any subject, that it takes multiple years of advocacy. And you just have to learn from whatever happened in the prior sessions and come in and incorporate that into your strategy for how to move forward. Another place where I have some issues in terms of the legislature is lack of oversight on things. So there often is a mentality of once a bill passes, oh no, we did that. We addressed that issue. We don't need to even look at how it was implemented. That's the executive branch's job. And we're probably not going to pass another bill on it this term because we already addressed it. But of course, that's not the case. In Annapolis, oftentimes it is an incremental approach. Bills don't fix everything all at once. They're taking, small steps or sometimes large steps to addressing an issue, but we absolutely do need to come back with more legislation to keep pushing on an issue. So I would just say that, keep that in mind as you work at Annapolis. That is just, for better or for worse, that is the mindset of the General Assembly for the most part in terms of how things happen, and try not to get too frustrated by it.
Right. Thank you, Delegate, for those insights. So unfortunately, it looks like our time is almost coming to an end now. I do want to allow each of our panelists some closing thoughts, just 30 seconds or less. If there was one final piece of advice that you could share with community advocates on how to work with elected officials to create food policy change, what would it be? And Delegate, if you'd like to go first, I know you have to hop off very shortly.
Sure. I would just say don't be afraid to speak up and to engage. Although our democratic system in America at every level of government is not meant for one person to make a big change, change usually does start with one voice. So don't hesitate to engage.
I'll jump in. So one thing we haven't really covered is in the course of cultivating a relationship with your elected officials, if you are doing something, if you have a nonprofit, if you're doing something on site somewhere, invite the elected officials to be part of it with you. There's nothing more powerful than seeing these things in action. We all love to see that. So, and it resonates for time immemorial. So that's a piece of advice I'd add.
And I would say, just to add to everything that's already been said, always push folks to think big and think different about ways in which we'll be able to solve this. Constituents and talking with the Food Council and others, we now have with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments a brand new farm committee, and that's food and agriculture, that's focused on really encouraging that we talk about food insecurity and talk about the production of food. In this region, we created a brand new committee in the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, a brand new standing committee that's focused on this issue. That's what happens with advocacy and working together. And I really want to thank Heather Bruskin and everybody with the Food Council who worked hand in hand with us to make this happen. And that's the key. I wanted to address one of the questions that was in the chat that talked about regional feedback and community feedback. Well, that's where the community feedback comes from. I talk to Heather all the time. And we talk about all the issues that are out there, and I hear from constituents all the time. That's where the relationships matter. I don't have to set up a special committee to do that as long as I have that line to the community that's saying, hey, these are things that are important. This is what I'm hearing. This is what we need to focus on. This is what we need to work on. And so I think that, again, as we talk about advocacy, the advocacy in power is understanding your power, understanding the role that you play in terms of truly enacting change. We are conduits of change as your elected officials. So use us in that vein.
All right, we're ending with use us. All right. Thank you again to all our panelists. I am going to turn it over to Heather for announcements and closing thoughts.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, and to our incredible panel. This has been such an inspiring opportunity this morning to highlight the incredible leadership of our elected officials in driving food systems transformation and their dedicated commitment to partnership with community advocates in your work. Thank you to Delegate Polakovich-Carr, County Executive Elrich, Councilmember Rice, Mayor Ashman, Michael J. Wilson, and Evelyn Kelly, to each of you for sharing your time, expertise, and insight with all of us. Special thanks to the Food Council staff, if you all can just give a quick wave, in particular, Michelle Caruso, Jana Washington, and Beza Tena, and our policy committee for your dedicated and talented hard work that made this event possible. Also, quick thanks to our Community Advisory Board, council members, board of directors, and the over 2,000 people and organizations who are collaborating to transform our food systems and build resiliency, sustainability, and equity in Montgomery County. Finally, I want to thank our sponsor, the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Co-op, and our partner, Holy Cross Health, for your support of this event series. And next week, our conversation continues on advocacy strategies with our final session on the role of community voice and policy change. So today we heard from our elected officials, and next we hear from our community leaders. And we will have welcoming remarks from County Council Vice President Gab Albornoz, as well as advocacy perspectives from food system community partners, including faith-based business and nonprofit leaders from Shepherd's Table, the Compost Crew, Rainbow Community Development Center, and Vanessa Pierre from Homestead Hustle and Healing as our moderator for our panel. More information is available on our website, which is linked in the chat box now. On behalf of the Food Council, we look forward to seeing all of you next week, and thank you for being such critical partners in this important work. We look forward to staying connected and to our continued work together. Everybody have a great day, and it was wonderful spending the morning with you. Take care.